From law to politics to broadcasting to medicine, psychologist Dr. Jenna Tevas says there's some awesome Southern women who've paved the way for others. I talked to her one-on-one about her latest book, Awesome Southern Women, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Dr. Jenna Tevas, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks.
You're very welcome. Likewise, meet you virtually as well. I know that obviously you earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts in illustration, obviously, at the Rhode Island School of Design, and you have a PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Texas at Austin, which I love. And I know obviously you live with your husband and stepchildren here in Charleston, where you are currently a psychologist specializing in couples therapy. Who else is Dr. Jenna Tevas these days?
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Gosh. Well, currently, I'm on vacation, and so that's good too. I'm back in Savannah, where I got the idea for the book.
Right.
I do enjoy some time off as well.
Oh, yes.
And in terms of other kind of artistic projects, I do a lot of painting. Currently painting a series of wiener dogs for a friend who has lots of wiener dogs. So, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this then, Dr. Teves. How would you paint your life right now?
Wow. Well, it's post-COVID almost, right? So it would definitely be very sunny at this point. It's really nice to be kind of getting out of the constrictions of all the quarantine and all the masking and everything. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank God for that. And I know that obviously, according to your website, you research the lives of women born in the South. And I know that you were inspired by the intricate stories and by their courage in embracing challenges and breaking barriers to build a better world. Let me ask you this. How have you embraced those challenges with this coloring book?
Wow. That's a good question. I would say that, I think the first challenge was really, going from idea to kind of carrying it all the way through, right? It's one thing to have kind of a brainwave or an artistic idea, right? And it's another thing to go, oh gosh, how do I kind of solve the problem of having, more than the few women I initially thought of? How do I choose them? How do I kind of tie it all together somehow, And so in the challenges within that, I definitely sought kind of help from other people in choosing kind of, well, who else would be a good fit in terms of women to portray, and got some help on kind of thinking about what facts and pieces of information to include about them in the little write-ups, because it's like they're all so interesting, right? That how do you choose kind of just a page of stuff? So yeah, I was happy with kind of how it turned out, but it was definitely a long project.
When you were obviously dealing with those facts, what did you learn more about those people as an author?
Yeah, wow. I learned a lot more. I don't think that I knew, for example, about who Josephine Baker even was. And so that was somebody that I think, I learned about along the way. And her story is just really interesting. The fact that, she decided to kind of go live in France instead of in the US. And the fact that she just adopted a bunch of children, right? In addition to being a famous dancer, was pretty cool too. Yes. A really rich and vibrant life. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I failed to mention this, but obviously the title of the book is Awesome Southern Women's Coloring Book. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to ask you this too. I know you wrote the coloring book honoring Southern women because you wanted to make their inspirational stories more accessible. What was the access that is before this book, Dr. Tevis?
What was the what?
What was the access before all of this, or before your book, actually?
Um, what was the access
Yes, ma'am.
to?
Yeah, I mean, you say that obviously you want to make the inspirational stories more accessible. What was that
Oh,
access before?
um, right. You mean like there wasn't as much of it, type of thing? Well,
Exactly.
I think, the kind of issue with access was, um, I think people in the country tend to think of the South as kind of, oh, it's this kind of cultural backwater, and like things don't really kind of change in the South, and things like that. And so having lived here for about 10 years now myself, I do see kind of a lot of vibrancy and a lot of real like muscle in in how people um, have really stood up for change in a big way, in in the history, and also in current day.
Right.
So I think I wanted to maybe more highlight that, just kind of how strong, some of these women have been in in making these important changes, and kind of pushing through their accomplishments.
Absolutely. And I know it's going to probably be a redundant question, but you said this quote: in the American imagination, the South is represented as sleepy, stagnant, backwards looking. What does
Mhm.
the South highlight right now?
Oh, great question. Wow. I mean, I think it's contradictory, but I mean, I think that's life. Like I think um there's definitely kind of the elements of, there's kind of conservatism, there's kind of the South, how the South is politically versus how other places are politically. But it's such an interesting mixed bag, right? Because there's a ton of progressivism here too, and it, even even economically, the South seems to be really sort of picking up speed. Um, so it seems like there's a lot of vibrancy really happening, and what I would say is that that's part of what makes it interesting to live in a place like Charleston, is that there's, yeah, there's a real kind of, a genuine kind of diversity of viewpoints.
And I know you said this quote: I grew up in the West and Midwest and thought of the South as anything but progressive. But when you scratch beneath the surface, the South has been the birthplace, that is, of powerful progressive movements throughout its history. What progressive movement reflects your book?
Wow, wow, um, wow. I would say, I don't know if there's a movement per se that it reflects, but I would definitely say that it's kind of, that in a lot of social justice movements, there's basically a, a call to kind of see whoever the movement is centered on as somebody who has dignity and worth, right, and who deserves a place in society. And I would say that the book has the same message of, of saying, hey, look at these women who really, in some way or another, really kind of fought for that, right? And they're, to kind of women and girls living in the South, I mean, this is part of your heritage, right? And
Absolutely.
we all have to kind of stand, you know, on whoever came before. Right?
Oh yes, absolutely. And it's always good to look at the past to move forward. And I know I want to go back to that quote too. You said this quote: "I grew up in the West and Midwest, and thought of the South as anything but progressive. But when you scratch beneath the surface, the South has been the birthplace of powerful progressive movements throughout its history. What else is underneath that surface that we just don't know about?"
Wow. Um, Probably a lot, you know? Um, I mean, and I guess it's a like, who's the we who may not know, right? I mean, like, I think there's a lot that, wow, that's such a good question, Quentin. I'm feeling a little tongue tied about that, honestly.
No worries.
Because I think there's just a lot there, and it partly depends on like who's doing the looking,
Right.
right? Um, as to what they're missing.
Mm, wow. And I hate to go political, but in 2021, how progressive is the West and Midwest becoming in your mind?
Um, I don't know. I you know it seems it definitely seems like we've got a situation where kind of the country's moving in a direction where like the kind of more like cities or population centers tend to be becoming more liberal, and then the rural areas tend to be becoming a bit more conservative. So it seems like it's maybe a little bit less regional than population density. And so I would imagine that, I know in California, where I was born, there are distinctly very famously liberal parts of the state, and then also distinctly conservative parts of the state. And and I think the same is probably true for the Midwest as well.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And I know too, you said this about the book quote: "Women, often overlooked in history, have played a key role in making the South and the country what it is today." This coloring book celebrates just a few of these inspirational women. What inspirational women who actually played a key role in history have been overlooked in your mind that resembles this book?
Well, so one thing that's been interesting is that when people in more like Midwestern states have kind of taken a look at the book, people in Chicago really want to claim I.W. Wells as one of them. And I'm like, well, sure. And like the roots are in the South, right? And the same thing with Rosa Parks. And she ended up in Michigan, but her roots are very distinctly, in the South too. And I think that was part of my point, right? Is that like I don't think either of those people would have been who they were unless they had grown up in the South, where there's kind of so much of a kind of cauldron of social change, right?
And I know you said this too: "Women of courage, hearts, and brains, who have who obviously I can't pronounce it. I got a tongue twister today here. Revolutionized the world in the fields of law, politics, sports, literature, anthropology, dance, journalism, human rights advocacy, education, broadcasting, music, and mathematics." This coloring book, you say, is for kids and adults alike. What gave you the courage, the hearts, and the brains to write this book?
Yeah. So I had just gotten married, and we were honeymooning in Savannah, and yeah,
Love that city.
Yeah, it's really special. and we were taking a tour, and realized, gosh, there's a lot of kind of older, probably even dead white men who are being kind of named in the history. And then there was a Black nurse from the Civil War era, Susie King Taylor, who had been kind of after the war started educational institutions for freed enslaved folks. And we thought, whoa, now that's an interesting story, right? And what about a tour or something that really like highlights like interesting women figures in the South, right? Because a lot of our history doesn't. And so I thought about that for a while, and thought, you know what, a coloring book. I mean, I'm not going to lead tours necessarily, but yeah, like a coloring book could be a really interesting way of telling that story.
And how do you hope people will tell this story 5-10 years from now?
Oh wow! Ooh, man, you ask good questions. 10 years from now. Well, gosh. I'm hoping that we will have continued to make some gains, in terms of social justice and equity. And, if that's the case, then, there may be different themes to highlight, right? If we're in kind of a better place where people are a bit better taken care of, where there's a bit less kind of racial tension, which I don't know if that's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, right? But I think if we kind of can progress as a society, then there may be different live issues that would be highlighted in a book.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Oh, I think people will agree with you on that. Absolutely. Well, this was a delight. I really do appreciate it. Dr. Jenna Tevas, thank you for your time, and welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin.
Oh, you're very welcome.